Ahoy, and welcome into another exciting episode of Not Allowed to Die, your podcast about mental health, where I, Dan Megler, social worker and life enthusiast, answer your questions about mental health from the dilemmas that I'm seeing in my own practice as a therapist and school social worker, and things that you email in. As always, Mariska is alongside me, and you don't hear her licking her paws, which means you've been doing a great job of rating and reviewing the podcast because we all know that when Mariska's licking her paws, it means she's hurting inside. Her heart is hurting because you have not shown her the love, but we appreciate what you do share. So tonight, Mariska and I are both super excited because we have a guest that I've been dying to have on. Maria Alessi is a mother to two boys, a best-selling author, legacy coach, and TEDx speaker. After her husband passed from a brain aneurysm, she actively created her way back to joy. She instinctively knew it was the only path worthy for their young boys. Rob had taught her the concept of two choices, and this one was made in his honor to continue his legacy. Maria has become a shining example of choosing love over fear and sadness. In her movement, Loving Life After Loss, Maria offers hope, healing, and happiness to the world when people expect it the least and need it the most. And so, again, I am just so excited to have you because as podcast listeners know, I've dealt with my own grief and been dealing with grief. And
Yeah.
you are the first person I have encountered online anywhere who has this positive spin. So if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and
Hey.
sharing a little bit about, what brings you here and how you started to form this group and this message.
Yeah, thank you so much for the lovely introduction. And first of all, I want to say I love the name of your podcast. It is such an important statement and call to action. It's just really um, so needed. And I love that you say that you found me as a first person positivity in this space because this is exactly why I started Loving Love After Loss, because I could not find anything out there that was supportive of the healing. There's a lot out there that's supportive of the grief and the pain, but not of the healing. And I wanted to change that. I wanted to change the narrative of grief. So I'm really happy to be here and talk about that with you, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, again, and I'm assuming, and I tried after my brother lost his son. I tried
Mm,
giving him the books and tried encouraging going to groups, but I think he felt like that's so negative, and I want to
yeah,
be in a space where that isn't helping me feel any better. And so
yeah.
I'm after your loss, where did you begin and how did you start to find this way and reject out and even create in your own mind that there could be
Mm,
something better and something different?
yeah. So, first of all, this was not my first major loss that I've gone through, and I have lost my dad when I was 20. My grandmother passed in our house when I was 12, so we've been looking after her. I should say mainly my mom and my sister. Um, yeah, for the 18 months before she passed, and a very close friend of mine. But then Rob, obviously, all these losses are very, very different, not just because of the people, but also because of the relationship that you have with those people. And then also because of your own state where you are at in life, what you have learned and how you've been dealing with it. I was not well equipped to handle the loss of my dad at all. And when Rob died, I had a very different background. So, Rob, my husband, we were both 45 when he passed. And I had been working in the space of self development with the focus on mindset and growth. So, I was very lucky that I've been teaching that for 7+ years at the time when Rob died, but it's been very much been put to the test. Um, so it's one way to teach it, and then another way to apply it when you just
Mhm.
lost your husband. It's a very, very different scenario. And Rob was actually the one, as you nicely said in your introduction, who taught me about the concept of two choices. He always said, you can choose what you focus on, the positive, the negative. It's always up to you how you create your day. That was so important. I learned that way before I started in the world of self development. And the other thing I want to mention here is that I was lucky enough that Rob and I were very open talking about things that were important to talk about. And I believe that probably came out of the fact that I had lost my dad so early. And I remember one day when Rob came home from work, delayed because the roads had been closed due to a fatal accident, and it triggered our conversation. What would happen if? How would you deal with that? How would I deal with that? And to cut a very long story short, we both said to each other, I would want you to take the boys and create the happiest life possible. that's what we wanted for each other. And bringing it back to simplicity, that's what love is. Love just wants you to be happy. So we were madly in love, and that's what we wanted for each other. If something was to ever happen, to do that. Yet, of course, that's theory when you talk about it, and when it then happens, it's still very different. Yet, these were my bases to start from, if that makes sense. I had my
Hmm.
background in mindset coaching. I had this beautiful conversation with Rob. I knew what I would want for him. So I instantly knew what he would want for me out of the connection, out of the conversations that we had. And here was I receiving those news. And I knew that was my direction. I had to create a happy life for the boys. And it's nothing that you can do overnight where you flip the switch and like your husband died. All right, let's create a happy life. Doesn't work like that. We all know that.
Hmm.
Yet it became my North Star. It became my lighthouse. It became my everything, my go to, my direction. And that made me start focusing on where I wanted the three of us to be. People didn't really understand that. People thought, like, what's going on with her? She's not grieving properly. She's still in shock. She's in denial. Like, all these things came up. Yet I knew exactly where I was heading with this. And I could feel that it was really like walking through mud at first. But the more I focused on love, on happiness, and all the things that I wanted to create for us in our lives, the more these things starting to appear. That's like pretty much a well-known energetic unwritten law, like
Hmm.
what you focus on is what grows, and that's how I got started.
Well, when we were talking, before we decided to record the podcast, one of the things
Mm,
that you said that really just kind of has stuck with me is that, we're I think it's great that we're preaching this idea that it's okay not to be okay, but that
yeah,
also on the other side of things, that it is okay to be okay. I know
thank
that,
you.
like
I
when
love
you
it.
said
Yes.
that, when I hear say that, like
Mm,
it's so amazing
yeah.
because I find when I'm doing grief work with clients, there's this feeling that many of them have that they're betraying the person they love if they heal.
Mm,
And that
yeah, it's
they give
complete
it the
opposite.
yeah, one of the things, just a
Yeah.
person giving themselves permission to say, "It
Mm,
doesn't diminish my love of this person in any way
yeah.
if I allow myself to heal and experience that best life." Because as you pointed
Yeah.
out, that person is not benefiting in any way from your continued
Mm,
suffering.
no. And I also want to say, this is where I usually suggest to do the role reversal. Like, put
Mhm,
yourself in your loved one's shoes. If you were on the other side, if you were the person who had passed, what would you want for your loved one? Would
mhm,
you want them to be sad forever and be hurting forever? Or would you want to do anything and everything in your might that you could do to see them happy, to see them focus on joy again, to
mhm,
continue life, and to leave a legacy for you. I felt the more I focused on happiness, the more I left a legacy for who we were as a couple.
mhm,
We were a full-on representation of love and happiness and embracing life. And I felt the more I could continue that, the more I would honor Rob and who we were as a couple, as a family of four. And I would not want to change that as a family of three. I still wanted to have that as a representation of who we are, love and joy and happiness. And I just knew that was completely in Rob's honor and also in his interest, in his
mhm.
absolute, this is what you want for people when you love them.
I have, I have a tattoo on each of my forearms.
Mm,
One is for Patrick Romer, who was one of my clients who died by
yeah,
suicide, and
yeah.
then another is for my nephew. And
Hmm.
I've talked about them to some of the students that I work with, and one kid said to me the other day, "Wow, you have some depressing tattoos, man." And I was thinking that, well, I don't find them to be depressing because when I
Yeah,
look at them, all I feel is the love that I felt for those people. I'm not they
yeah,
don't make me sad, they make
yeah,
me feel connected to those people in a
yeah.
way that they are always gonna be a part of my story. I will always be a
I
part of
can
their
so
story.
relate.
But we
Mm,
don't need, so again, this idea that a loss doesn't we don't have to be always and forever more devastated by it.
mm,
So how does, though, with from the mindset to whichever else, for people who are wanting to find a different way of looking at it, where do you
mm.
suggest people begin? So when you and how do you, like, you've created sort of a community around this. So can you tell me a
Yeah.
little bit more about that?
Yeah, so that's how it all started. It's really interesting because I about 4 months after Rob passed, I had this real nudge to write a book about our story because I had so many people reacting differently to how we responded so differently
Mhm,
to the loss. And I decided to write down our story. And I thought it would be a bit of a love legacy for Rob, one day when the boys are old enough, because they were only 10 and 8 when Rob
Hmm.
passed. Um, and also to maybe give some people hope when they read our story that there is a different way of dealing with that. So
Hmm.
I wrote the book and I called it Loving Life After Loss. And what I didn't expect was that it became an Amazon #1 bestseller and it ranked in the top 100 of Australia. And I was absolutely blown away. I
Hmm.
so did not expect to see this. And I thought, wow, okay, so obviously I've got something the world needs here. And I
Hmm.
knew that was hope, that was happiness, that was healing, all these beautiful H words. And I shortly after I published a book, I took the boys traveling around the world. We traveled for 2 months. And while I was in Vienna, that's where I'm originally from, I had this thought, there's something the world needs in this. And this is where the seed was planted that I would create something bigger around this. And I contacted a mentor, and he's very specialized in building tribes, building movements. I didn't just want to have another group, where you collect people and collect numbers. And it really was about the movement, about the idea, about this heartfelt, hey, let's heal together, let's do something together, let's hold space for each other. I wanted this to be active and proactive and holding space. That's the biggest thing. So yeah, when we came back from our travel around the world, I sent the boys back to school. So we started sort of a half normal life again. What's
Hmm.
normal? We needed to recreate that. And I went on and started the movement and called it after my first book, Loving Life After Loss. And yeah, meanwhile, 3.5 years later, 3,500 people, it's been an incredible ride. Everything that I healed, I turned into either a healing journey or a healing program or a talk or a TEDx talk, another book, a retreat, a VIP day. I just have so much on offer for people that will help them shift the perspective around this old-fashioned stigma of grief, that we really need to change that narrative around grief and how we deal with it.
One of the misconceptions that you and I were talking about before was that when Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was
Yeah.
originally creating the like stages of grief, it wasn't for
Mm,
people who had suffered grief. She was working with people who
correct.
were dying of, a terminal
Yeah.
disease, and that
Yeah.
was what she was studying. So what are some other misconceptions that you're running into a lot in your work
Mm,
that people feel? Anything that comes to
yeah.
mind that you're helping people kind of
Yeah.
undo their expectations on?
The first one is that grief will stick with you forever. You see it everywhere. Every grief group has got this, oh, grief will stay with you forever. It just changes, it just transforms. I'm like, I don't know. I really don't like that perspective. I say I treat grief like a visitor. Yes, it will come every now and then. Yes, there are triggers. Yes, there might be a song, a place, a scent even,
Mhm.
or a word or a movement. Like, you might see a particular body movement and you're like, oh, you're in that, things will get triggered, of course. Yet it so depends on how you respond to it, how you deal with it. You can go like, oh, here we go again, and grief's still here, and you can fall apart and, go down that rabbit hole. That's not helping you. Or you can go like, oh, wow, that was a nice reminder. And it might even bring tears up. Okay, sit with that, embrace it, allow it in.
Mhm.
And also allow the happiness, because that all the emotions always coexist. Yet we are so trained that when you're grieving, you only have negative emotions. And I don't agree with that. I had so many beautiful memories come up after Rob died. And of course, when you lose somebody, when somebody passes over, at the beginning, they trigger more pain and
Mhm.
more like highlighting the absence of that person. Yet it so depends on how you handle it. When you keep focusing on the beauty of it, on the love that you shared, and keep taking this forward with you, then you're not taking the pain and the grief with you. You're taking the beauty and the love with you. And it's really a shift in perspective. And there's one sentence that really represents it so nicely. I'm going to share here right now. And this is, there'll always be a hole in my heart. I mean, can you feel the heaviness of that sentence? Can you feel the
Mhm.
negativity, the pain? I replaced it with one simple word that changed everything for me. And that was, there'll always be a place in my heart. And
Mhm.
that is so welcoming, that
Mhm.
neutralizes it, that makes it more positive, that makes it, yeah, it's just the exact same thing. Yet when you say whole, it makes it a negative thing. When I say there's a place in my heart, it keeps him in there. The whole
Mhm.
for me is like he's going to fall through that. He's not going to stay there. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
When you really think of that as a physical thing. And I refuse to see it like that. I don't feel there's a hole in my heart for Rob. I feel there's a really beautiful place in my heart for Rob, and he'll always be there. You know, he'll
Mhm.
always be an incredible, huge love of mine, and he'll always be our son's dad. And that will never change. So I prefer to see it that way. It's a simple but really significant change. And everything we do in Loving Life After Loss is based on that simple shift, simple change in meaning, change in wording, change in perspective. And it really is simple. I'm not saying it's easy, but it really is simple how to heal and how to shift those things.
Well, I always say there's a big difference. Simple. It's if I say to you lift 1,000 pounds, it's simple, but it doesn't make it easy.
Mm.
But that being said,
Yeah,
like once when we can know when we have those directions on how to do it. Now, in the
yeah,
programs that if a person goes on your website or whatnot, they're going to see some different options for different
mhm,
kinds of programs that might fit with them.
yeah,
And I think there's no
mhm,
one right way to do any of this, but I like that you've got a lot of different
yeah,
tools and options that people
yeah,
could choose from. So is
yeah.
it journaling or is it things like that that can help people work through some of their grief, but with focusing on it in a different way? Or what might people get through some of the programs that you offer?
I yeah. There's always like in every sort of healing, there is an element of shifting your perspective. That's
Hmm.
that's really in everything I do. I help you change your perspective around the things around your wording in particular. You know,
Hmm.
I just ran the healing retreat. We do them twice a year at the moment, and it was 2 weeks ago that I ran it, I think. Yeah, and I had one lady come, and I'm not going to give too many details away for obviously confidentiality reasons. Yet there's one thing that happens so often, and that's why I can share this, where people come in and they have this perspective of he left me,
Hmm.
you know, my husband left me and I still haven't forgiven him for that. And I hear that a lot. It's a very, very common thing. That's why I picked that out, because it doesn't give away any personal details. And you hear this sentence, and I look at them and I say, it's not that your husband left you, he died.
Hmm.
The outcome is the same, but he died is a very neutral statement. He died. There's no malintention behind that.
Hmm.
When you say he left me, there is malintention behind that. There is I actively choose that I am leaving you behind and I'm going that way. And that's not the case. You know, he died. It's a fact. We cannot argue that fact. And it becomes neutral language. And I always say there is this space between um, the loss and joy, as in, that's where I pick you up from. This is what you feel. My husband left me. And then there's this big space in between that I call healing, where we neutralize language, where you look at things as is rather than how you interpret them. And then there's joy. So for me, that's where I pick you up from. And that's a destination where I want you to be. And in between, there is relearning, redefining, and allowing, a whole lot of allowing. It's such a beautiful word. And that's sort of the essence of everything I do. But there's different variations of that and different intensity levels of that. So yeah.
Well, I think again, what you're drawing on is a lot of what we see. And I recently did a in-depth training on cognitive processing therapy, where a lot
Mm,
of it is around that precision of language and precision of our
yeah.
thoughts and reframing and
Yeah.
challenging those generalizations that are not helpful. And so when
Hmm.
we're telling ourselves over and over again something that's not helpful, it's going to keep
Hmm.
us feeling sick. Whereas what
Yeah.
sometimes just a subtle shift in what we're telling
Yeah.
ourselves to something that's more accurate can be really beneficial.
Yeah.
I think in the United
Mm,
States, and you can tell me better how it is around the rest of the world, we seem to have a real huge problem with acknowledging that death even exists. And so
mm,
people act as if every death just came out of nowhere, like it was a tornado,
yeah.
because we
Yeah.
don't, because again, I think partially because we have this society that's supposed to be secular in a way where you don't ask, it's
Mm,
very considered very rude to ask about religion or things like that. So because of
mm,
that, people feel like they need to hide whatever feelings that they have and they don't know how to put any of this into a context.
mm.
I was talking to a client
Yeah.
earlier today and she was saying how, again, death creates such anxiety for her and
Mhm.
that we can reframe this. And for me, I said, for me, the word death is always paired with the idea of birth and life and opportunity. And just like
Yeah.
anything, where
Yeah.
these two things, so this may be entering into just a new stage of existence or whatnot, but if we can
Mm.
change that differently, are you seeing, like,
Yeah.
because your community or whatnot is global, do you see big
Mhm.
differences culturally from place to place and the people that you work with or connect with?
Yeah, I see very big differences. So most people that I connect with come from our culture, and I'll say our because it's like the
Hmm.
Western culture, sort of, that whole, death is so tragic, and
Hmm.
we're all falling apart. I don't agree with that, as you know. I don't have to go back into that again.
Hmm.
But there is cultures like the Japanese culture where you actually celebrate your loved one's life when they
Hmm.
pass. The family comes together for like a week or two. I'm not really sure. Please don't quote me on the exact time, but where they all come and sit with the body and share memories. And same thing with the Mexican culture. I run regular interviews in my movement with the hashtag Upspiral Grief. So I invite people with a very positive story. Can't wait to
Hmm.
share yours, actually. I was just thinking about that. Ours is coming up as well. But where you have this opportunity to share your background, your story, what did you do with it? And I love that we've got this up spiral grief idea behind it, because it comes from the space of grief, which is, yes, it is sad, and it's deep, and it's really quite life changing. Obviously, people are always like, my life will never be the same. Well, yeah, you can say that from a very poor me scenario, and I say that with a whole lot of respect, seriously, because I've been there, I've done that, I know what it feels like. Or you can say it as a complete neutral statement: my life will never be the same. You can even come from a positive thing, when you had a negative experience, and go like, hey, my life will never be the same because I'm not going back there. I'm going to do it differently from now on. So you can say the same sentence with completely different emotion behind it. And I always invite people to look at things as just is. But coming back to your question, because I'm completely distracting now, the Mexican people, same thing. They celebrate the life of the loved one. It's the day of a death, and everybody comes together, and there's colors everywhere and beautiful memories and joy being shared. And I think that we can learn so much from these cultures that actually do, in my eyes, this is just my very personal opinion, the right thing by focusing on the joy and the beauty of what this life has brought to ours. And that's what I decide to focus on. Rob has brought so much love, so much beauty, so many incredible things to my life. And, you know, in particular, our two boys, there's two more lives that came
Hmm.
into the world just because of our union, which is so incredible. And I choose to celebrate that and embrace that. And speaking about religion and different cultures and different backgrounds, I understand that everybody's got a different faith. But from my spiritual beliefs, this is something that Rob and I have chosen. This
Hmm.
was our soul contract. We came here to do that, and part of that contract was his passing. Not that I remember that in this lifetime, but
Hmm.
I see it as such. And to me, that has given me a whole lot of peace to recognize that. And yeah, this is just my very personal background, how I see it.
But what I like about, and what we were talking about, prior to this conversation,
Mhm.
your program doesn't require a person to buy into any particular religion or spiritual viewpoint, because
Yeah,
I think that's a challenge for some people who want to have a more positive view, who are atheist or who don't belong to any
yeah,
spiritual community. And that
yeah.
what you're saying to people is that's great if you do, but even if you
Mm.
don't, we can learn to reframe this in
Yeah,
just the here and now and the experience. So I
my
think that's,
favorite word,
yeah,
reframe.
yeah. And I think
Yeah.
that's so crucial, to
Mm.
being able to be accessible to all people, no matter where they're coming from
Yeah,
on a spiritual continuum.
absolutely. And I find that also very, very important. And I have that even in my group rules that, spiritual beliefs, everybody's got different ones. When you come into the space, this is not to discuss different religions. Please be mindful and respectful that everybody's faith is different. I'm happy for people to have a chat about it, to have a discussion, but when it becomes a this is right, this is wrong, and you can only do that, I don't allow in my group, because we are all here to heal. We are all here to be community. We don't
Mhm.
heal well in isolation. I want people to be able to come in and feel the love, feel the support, feel that there's people there to hold space for them. And that's what my focus is in the group, not if you are, Hindu or whatever background, I've just picked one,
Mhm.
it doesn't really matter what your spiritual background is. I want you to feel safe in this space to just be and be held.
Are there things that you hear people saying, again, that are particularly helpful or unhelpful when first
Mm,
encountering someone that going to those wakes and those funerals and things like that? So any
yes.
things, examples or things that you're hearing from people. So if you could share a few that like, don't
Let me
do
think.
these ones, try to do this
Yes.
one.
Yeah, I've actually just put an entire do's and don'ts list together as a, free content that I'm giving away. And the number one thing that I really dislike, let me put it that way, is that sentence, that one liner, my condolences.
Mhm.
It is a sentence that when you are on the receiving end and you hear it 15 times, 20 times, it starts losing its meaning. If you hear it 100, 200 times, it becomes really debilitating. It is something that made me just want to scream out to people to please stop saying that. I remember when I was on the receiving end after my dad passed away, we had hundreds of people and everybody said the same thing. Oh, my condolences. Oh, my condolences. And just with the face as well that comes along, you're
Mhm.
like, you just want to scream. You want people to hold you, to give you space, either or, but not to have this one liner that
Mhm.
completely loses its meaning when you say it over and over again. Yet it's a polite thing, it's a go to option, it's what we are trying to say.
Mhm.
And I invite people to come up with things that come straight from your heart. Trust your heart. You'll often find answers in there. And even if you just go to that, my heart goes out to you, or even complete basic, I have no words. I don't
Mhm.
know what to say that out loud. It's so much easier to hear that truth. And it's so refreshing to hear truth like that rather than my condolences for the 357th time. Do you know what I mean? It's yeah, that's my number one thing. There's always this or another one. Call me if you need anything. Anything. I really mean it. Nobody does it when
Mhm.
you are sitting in deep grief. You don't reach out. It's like, oh, who could help me today? You are incapable of asking for help in the first few weeks, months, even sometimes people even for years. But it's this whole make it simple for people to accept help in, as in, I'm going shopping on Tuesday. Please send me a short list what you need.
Mhm.
Or, hey, I can cook for you next week. Do you prefer Tuesday or Thursday? Give them simple choices. Hey, I'm on your cooking list because some people do rosters, on Tuesday. Do you prefer pasta or a salad? Because people are like so incapable of making choices or saying, tell me anything. What do you want me to cook for you? I don't know. My husband just died. I can't even think about what I want to eat. Do you know what I mean? It's just so simplified for people and trust your heart. Come straight from your heart. Don't go to these. Oh God, I can't think of the word. There's a word in German that represents it so well. Floskels. It's like a thing that you use over and over and over again.
Mhm.
It's the same sentence that everybody uses, and it's just not helping. It becomes empty. It becomes meaningless.
Yeah, the one I hear people complain to me about is when people will say that their loved one is in a better place. And
Oh
I
yes.
know it's
Oh,
meant, I meant it's meant in a kind way,
oh.
but it's to that person who's
Mm.
on the receiving end of that, it can come off as just obnoxious as the
Yeah. You know what happens with that? I'm so glad that you mentioned that as an example because I'm gonna share a little bit what comes up for me. Um, in my movement, this is actually one of the steps in the healing journey that I teach from grief to relief. And one of the final steps in there, and I'm saying that very carefully because there's a reason why I have these steps building up to it. It's really quite hard to just jump to this last one or second last one. But one of the steps is talking about the hidden gifts in adversity. Every adversity comes with gifts, and it takes a certain amount of healing to be able to allow them in, to be able to actually look at them. And I teach that in this journey. I literally hold people's hands how to get to that point, to allow yourself that in. And I always say, you'll often pay quite a high price to leave you with those gifts, so you may as well accept them. They are yours to take. I want you to take them. And as I said, it takes preparation to be able to allow that in. Yet, when you think about the hidden gifts in the adversity, what are the gifts that I received through Rob's passing? And then somebody comes completely unexpected and claims, hey, he's in a better place. How on earth can you know? And who on earth are you to tell me this? Because if that's really the fact, if that's maybe one of my gifts to discover that he might be in a better place, then please don't take that away from me.
Mhm.
Because when you take that away from me, it feels like a slap in the face and not like a gift when you say that. Because when I have just lost someone, I don't want to hear from anyone, hey, he's in a better place. It literally just triggers you. It literally just, it's actually quite hurtful to hear that. It is not helping you. That's the complete polar opposite. And people need to learn to understand that. If it really was the case, then it's up to me to discover that. And it might even turn into a gift to discover that and leave me in a more peaceful state with his passing. Yet when anybody tells me that, in particular, if it's premature, before I'm even there to understand or accept it in or allow it in, or even see it as a gift, then it does the complete polar opposite. It's really debilitating. It's quite hurtful and harmful, actually.
Yeah, I have a friend, and he came to me the other day, and he said he and one of his college friends, is his wife is dying of brain cancer and will
Mm,
probably within the month pass away. And a bunch of the rest of their college friends were trying to figure out how to be of support, and they weren't sure
yeah,
what their steps should be. And I said
yeah.
to him, the first advice I generally give is from the motto of an organization called Play for Peace, and it's
Mhm.
show up, shut up, and be available. And the
Oh my
idea
god, I
of just
love this. I love this so much.
yeah.
This is
The idea of just
incredible. Yeah,
being with a person in their pain in silence and
yeah,
not having to say anything and just sitting and
yeah.
letting them. But the other thing I said is, and you can tell me what you think of this, but
Mm,
to schedule out for 6 months from now, a year from now,
yeah.
and putting things on your
Yes.
calendar to follow up and reach
Oh, I
out
love it.
when
Yeah,
all of the rest of the people who have left, who've
drops off.
are done dropping off food that nobody wants to eat or
Yeah,
doing other things like
yeah,
that, like then that's the time to be showing up at the house and
yes,
still making time and connecting for
yeah,
their friend and his kids and whatnot,
yeah.
because that's the real challenge, is to show up long term without any
Mm.
agenda, but just to
I
be
love
part of
this
that
so
people.
much. Yeah, it's absolutely spot on. I couldn't agree more. Schedule it in your calendar 6, 12, 18 months.
Mhm,
It's so important. And also because most people by then will have forgotten about the actual anniversary dates.
mhm.
Yet the person who's going through it will go, oh, there's another 12th, there's another June, there's another, whatever. It's been X amount of months, and then it becomes years. And yeah, nobody actually thinks about the actual date anymore, very rarely. And I love that. Yeah, schedule it in, check in with people. That's an incredible thing to do if you still check in at
Yeah.
that time.
One of the
That's where you
things
need it the most. As you said,
well,
everybody else has dropped off, you
right,
know?
when they're
Mm,
gone, and that
yeah,
piece, and hopefully your relationship will still be there. Your relationship isn't
yeah,
contingent upon that death. But
yeah,
speaking of anniversaries, in
mm,
working with my clients, so many of them report that the actual anniversary date itself isn't as bad as the anticipation of the anniversary. And I think that's
yeah,
everything about what you're saying, is that
mm,
because they're having this build up and everyone's telling them, oh, you got to watch out for those holidays and those birthdays and those anniversaries. So any tips
yeah,
that you give to people about for themselves, as these, like,
yeah,
to either reframe that or to have it not have so much anxiety about the coming of the
mm,
anniversaries?
yeah. Yeah, I really love that, and I agree with that. It's often the build-up is a lot harder than the actual day. Yet, what I in my group, I always put a big heads up on the day after.
Mm,
So there's often the anticipation, and you get more and more anxious, and then you're like, "What I'm going to do? What I'm going to do?" And then the actual anniversary time comes along, and because the build-up has been so shocking, it actually doesn't feel quite as shocking anymore. Interestingly enough. I'm going to talk about the build up in a minute as well. But for me, it's always the day after. And I often say to people, um, rather than having all this anxiety and how am I going to cope with it, think about how could I spend this day honoring his life, or
mm,
her life, whoever you have lost in your life. And how could I spend the day honoring my loved one's life? What can I do to remember? Or, like, for example, in our case, every year, because we're passed on the 12th of June, every year on the 12th of June, I do something with the boys to celebrate family, just
mm,
to celebrate us. And sometimes we talk about dad, sometimes more, sometimes less. Of course, it always comes up in conversation, but I don't make it a, okay, and today we have to talk about dad all day. Like, we naturally talk about him all the time anyway, and sometimes more often and sometimes less. It's just completely natural. I never want this to be forced. I have to talk about him every day, or I don't talk about him when the boys don't. No, I say it when it comes up. I just trust my heart with that. Yet for the anniversaries, I always plan something fun, something where we get away for a weekend as a family, and and then just do something to really focus on love, focus on family. The most important thing for me though is when it comes to the day after, I always say to my clients, and for the day after, I want you to honor you. I
Mhm.
want you to literally plan something where you either, I always say, I prefer if you have somebody with you who's really capable of just holding space for you, just focusing on you, celebrating you. But when it comes to you as my client, I want you to use the day to celebrate how far you have come since, and really focus on that and be really attentive to, wow, I've actually achieved XYZ in this year, in those 2, in those 3, 4, 5, 10 years, whatever. And honor that, honor your journey, honor how far you've come, because it gives you another reason to celebrate. It gives you an opportunity to check in what you've achieved rather than the build up and then the day, and oh, it wasn't so bad. And then the next day is often where the real crash happens, where you're like, oh, now I feel really deflated because now it's over. And this gives you a focus on something to do, to focus on something that is beautiful, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Mm.
Well,
Yeah.
again, this has been so interesting. Where else should people go to find out more about you and the movement that you've created?
Mm. I think the easiest is to just go to my website. It's mariaalessi.com, and from there you literally see everything that we offer. You know, there's my books. I've actually written a second book called Happy Healing, where the steps from the healing journey from grief to relief are in there as well. There's everything that you can imagine, and then you can contact me. You can learn more about the retreats or the courses, about the movement. There's a join button. You can follow us on Instagram. There's literally, it's like the little central point that directs you to everything we offer and everything we do as a group. And yeah, I just really, if you don't know where to start, just book a chat with me. You can do that via the website as well, and I'm more than happy to point you in the right direction. It might not always be my courses. You might be better off somewhere else. Some people really do need more support, as in a counselor, a psychiatrist. I'm a coach. It's a very different approach. So I like to just listen to people, what they need, and redirect them where I feel it's good for them. Yeah.
I had I was talking to another person and they were angry that grieving is in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Disorders. But it's not for
Yeah.
regular grief. It's for when people are
Mm.
grieving to a point where they can't function. So in those
Yeah.
cases, that's what you're saying. Like those are people
Yeah.
who need to seek the help of a psychiatrist, social worker, therapist, or anything else like
Yeah.
that. But normal grieving is
Yeah.
something that we are all going to have to lose people in our lives.
It's not a
Death
condition.
is just,
Yeah.
and I think it's what I love so much. And I do think everybody needs a little dose of what you've got, because there is not one
Thank
of
you.
us who is going to go through without losing people. And if we can
Yeah.
begin to stop to not always have to view that as a tragedy, and to be able to start to say, no,
Yeah.
there is a way of doing this where we can allow space for pain, but we can also allow space for joy.
Mm.
And so I think your
Yeah.
message is so necessary for every person. So I hope everyone who's listening to this, I hope you'll
Thank
at
you.
least go and check out the
Mhm.
website and check out what's there, because it's
Thank you.
a way forward, because you're going to have this and we don't have to live in fear
Yeah.
of the pain of grief all the time. It may be there, but it
Mm.
doesn't have to be the only thing that's there. So again, thank you
Yeah.
so much for sharing
Absolutely.
all of this.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really grateful that we could have this conversation.
All right. Well, until for all of those of you listening, remember, do whatever it takes to get you through this world. And until we speak again, you are just not allowed to die.